Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I'm Tyler. Joining me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Be sure to follow us on all our socials at the Around the 412, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and go subscribe to us on YouTube as well. Also, the Rocket Around the 412 is done, but we're still going to promote the Isla Keen Future Fund, who Dalton Keen tragically passed away back in October, as all of you know by now, but there's still that fund that we're going to keep pushing for his 2-year-old daughter that was left behind to help out that financial burden for them. So that will be linked in the description of the show on all platforms. And yeah.
I also want to give a couple shout outs here. We're still going to put the link in the description as well for the Chasing M's Foundation and what they have going on, because I believe that's going to stay open. I have no idea what they're going to do with all that money, but it's going to be awesome to see because they can build like buildings for those types of things if they want to, so it'd be great to see what they do. We're also going to put the Pittsburgh Clothing Company shirt that they put out. They actually have a couple different designs. So when we talked last week, they only had the one where it's like an outline of DeMar in the Bills uniform, but they have since come out with another one, specifically like it's outlined in a Pitt uniform now too. So they have a couple different designs, and all those proceeds will go to the Chasing M's as well. I also want to apologize because listening back to last week's episode, I think the first time I referenced it, I said making instead of Chasing M's Foundation. So it's Chasing M's is DeMar Hamlin's whole thing. I don't want to misspeak. So I wanted to correct that. Also, you mentioned the Isla Keen thing. I want to give a shout out to my Uncle Bill's fire department. Well, both of them. He's the fire chief for Center Township and Aliquippa. And Isla, although like we couldn't give her a or we could have, but her mom declined. She didn't want a physical gift or anything like that for Christmas, and we obviously passed that forward. We told the great story about how we were able to adopt kids from the Salvation Army. She's like obsessed with fire trucks right now, I guess. Like everybody in the family had to get her some type of fire truck when Santa came through and on a fire truck. Like she was just obsessed with it. So Center Township and Aliquippa, where my uncle was the fire chief, is going to bring all the fire trucks to one place, and I was going to get to see all of them. So shout out to the fire departments and the firefighters for making that happen as well. Cool. So yeah, me, Kaylee, and Isla will be going to see those at some point in the near future. But again, just shout out to my Uncle Bill. I don't know if he's going to watch or listen to this specific episode, but I guess I'll have to make sure he does now to hear his name. But other than that, we can talk about sports now. It's kind of, I feel like it just happened so quick. I think that we kind of, at least in the back of my mind, thought the Steelers were going to get everything that they needed to happen to be in the playoffs.
Yeah,
and I didn't think that we would be talking about their last game, but here we are.
Yeah, I was so coincidentally enough, I don't know why NFL Sunday ticket wouldn't let me cast to the TV that I was in the room with, and so I was watching the Steelers game on my phone, and I had the Jets Dolphins game because that was the nationally broadcast game on what was it, Fox, I think. I had that game up, and I was just like occasionally looking up from my phone to like see what's going on in the Jets Dolphins game. That game, I mean, I'm sure if you were an actual like fan of either of those teams watching that game, you were bored out of your mind. But it was just so disappointing because it seemed like nobody wanted to win that game, and it was frustrating as a Steeler fan knowing we needed the Dolphins to lose. That it's like our last hope relies on Joe Flacco. Ironically enough, it didn't get done, but. Yeah, it just seemed like after the previous week, it seemed like everything was just going to fall into place. And I mean, the Bills were struggling with the Patriots at least a little bit, at least in the first half.
You knew they weren't going to lose that game, though.
Yeah, there was no way where they were going to lose. I mean, they returned the opening kickoff, which was awesome. Josh Allen was very emotional after that game, talking about that, which they hadn't returned a kickoff in 3 years and 3 months. Which
there was a lot of threes involved.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it sucks as a Steeler fan to know that we didn't get it done, but at least we know that it wasn't because of the Steelers. The Steelers, at least in that last week, because the Steelers could have won games in the previous season, so it is because of the Steelers. But at the same hand, going into that last week, the Steelers did their job and did their part in their effort to get into the playoffs. It didn't work out, but at least we're ending the season on a high note. And I feel, even though we didn't make playoffs, I feel a lot better about this team now than I did. I mean, even just a few weeks ago, a few months ago, definitely. But going into the offseason, the way they finished out makes me have a lot of hope for what the team can be in the next seasons and seasons to come.
Yeah, it's funny because being at the stadium, it's 28-14 in the last few minutes. Everybody was on their phone. You're just like paying attention to the Jets-Dolphins game as opposed to the Steelers game
Yeah.
that you're there to watch, because you knew we were to take care of our business. How's this Jets-Dolphins game going to play out? And like you said, it looked like neither team was moving the ball, and it even seemed like the Jets were going to get one more chance. And then Quinnen Williams takes a horse collar penalty that moves the ball to midfield at that point, and I was like, that might be it. That might be it. And
Yeah.
it was. I mean, that was pretty much the deciding factor. The Dolphins at that point maybe get like 12 more yards and they kick a 50-yard field goal to win it. And the Jets missed the field goal earlier in the game too, which,
Yep.
things play out differently. So I don't like just adding points at the end of the game saying, oh, then, the Jets would have won if you just give them that 3 points, because maybe the game plays out differently. But still, it's like in a 9-6 game, they missed a field goal earlier. You just wonder how differently things could have been. But yeah, so the Steelers don't get what they need. They finished the season 9-8, but to your point, 7-2 in the last 9, and that's kind of what we talked about last week. Like, how would you feel if they do take care of their own business but still don't get in? And there were even people that was like their ideal scenario. This wasn't mine. I've just presented this on here, that were saying like you want them to take care of their own business but not make the playoffs because they can go out like into the offseason on a high
On
note.
a better note, instead of getting killed by the Bills or something.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't think that would have affected them mentally going into the offseason. I still would have loved to have seen them make the playoffs. But let's just start with this because before we take a backtrack and talk about this game specifically, you kind of already were starting to segue this going into the offseason. I mean, what is, the one thing that you're looking forward to the most probably as we go through the offseason? Because with as accessible as these players are on social media, seemingly every single one of them, we can watch their entire offseason workouts, really. So, like, what is one thing that you are really looking forward to this offseason?
Well, one, I want to see the health of Calvin Austin.
Okay.
We didn't get to see him at all this season. The 4th round pick from last year's draft, and he's a guy that we're hoping. And I'm not even. I don't want to entertain all the Diontae drama too much among Steeler fans. Like,
Yep.
I'll just touch on that real quick. It's
Might as well.
it's a cryptic tweet that anybody, you can interpret it any way you want. That doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean it was about the Steelers. And going into his following on Instagram, like, people just are looking for excuses, in my opinion, to make drama because they need something to talk about now that we're in the offseason. Whether Diontae Johnson is a Steeler next year or not, I don't think has anything to do with that tweet. It literally zero. He could be gone either way. I don't think that tweet has anything to do without it. I just think that some Steeler fans are trying to make drama where drama doesn't happen. Because, to be honest, outside of the whole like Mitch getting in a scuffle in the locker room sort of thing, there wasn't a lot of drama to the Steelers this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Steeler fans, they kind of miss it. I mean, when we had Le'Veon and AB, it was like every week. So, yeah, I think that's just like water under the bridge. There's no smoke there. It is what it is. And I saw people even talking about, and I was actually talking about with my friend Quentin last night, like the whole, like, would you trade Diontae for a 2nd round pick thing? And I was like, I don't know where any of this is coming from. And I mean, my answer to that would have been like, that really depends on what their draft would look like and what kind of 2nd round pick that would be. But even then, I don't think that's happening. I don't think the Steelers are planning on getting rid of Diontae, because what you're left with George Pickens and a bunch of fans at that point. It's just a bunch of stupid stuff. But anyway, this offseason, I'm looking forward to Calvin Austin progressing, and I'm also looking for improvement, and not necessarily guys that are individually on the team, but just looking for the Steelers to upgrade that offensive line even more. They started to last year, and I think that could be taken care of in the draft, depending on how the draft board falls. But I think they need to look at the tackle positions. Like, Chooks is what he is, but I think you could get a guy with a higher ceiling there. And then Dan Moore Jr., I think there is some upside to him, but I just think there's a lot of inconsistency. I think he did get better as the season went on, but I think I would like a guy Like if you could get a guy in the first round, like a Skoronsky or something like that, I don't think that the Steelers are going to get them because they're too high. They're going to be drafted too high. But I think the improvement along the offensive line is where I'd look. And I, as far as guys that are on the team go, I mean, Calvin Austin, I want to see what he has. And I just want to see more videos of like Kenny Pickett just working with people. That's what I really want to see.
Well, you mentioned Diontae Johnson. I mean, to me, that's what I'm looking forward to the most is like I hope that him and Kenny find the time in the offseason to get together and develop a relationship on and off the field. Because clearly there seemed to be more of a repertoire between Kenny and George, and maybe that is his guy. Maybe Pickens is the number one, but either way, I think they're going to need Diontae Johnson next season. People can take my word for it or not. I really don't care. It is what it is. Who am I? I'm just some guy on a podcast. That tweet is not about the Steelers. I will 100% say that with conviction. And as far as the following thing goes, that he wasn't following them last year and he got a new contract. He now is following them on both Instagram and Twitter because I think that people like bullied him to that point online. And he was like, okay, well, if people are going to think it's like something with the organization, then I will follow them just to kind of put that to rest. So I'm glad that he did. If you're trading Diontae Johnson, I don't think it would have been because he was disgruntled or something. You're not trading him because of the production. We saw what he could do in 2021. I understand that visibly, and to everybody's knowledge, I don't think I'm breaking any news here. He took a step back in 2022. And it's very unfortunate, especially when you have a young quarterback here. You would have liked to have been able to lean on a guy like that more, who is supposed to be, the leader of the wide receivers room. And I think that he is from, that perspective, but on field, the production you would like that to match as well. I'm not going to, continue to throw out that, the 0 touchdowns thing. Everybody knows that. They can look at the stats and see it. But I think that he will get back closer to the 2021 version next season. I think it's going to be a lot about him and Kenny working together in the offseason. So that's definitely something for me. Obviously, like year 2 leap for George Pickens, that's an obvious thing. Najee Harris looked like a much healthier player in the second half of this season. What is he going to be able to do? Is he going to be that back to start next year and be able to do it for a whole season? The Marvin Leal, because he's kind of a tweener. Like, is he going to put on weight and be like a Cam Hayward in waiting, or is he going to be like a strictly edge rusher like they used him this year? There's a lot of things, but to me, the number one thing, and this isn't something I've necessarily seen a ton of people talking about, everybody besides Mark Robinson in that inside linebackers room could be gone. They're going to be like completely rebuilding that, and I'm curious as to how they're going to do that. I don't think enough people are talking about an inside linebacker potentially being a pretty high draft pick for this team.
So not to interrupt, I just want to throw out, I've already said I want that 33rd pick to be Noah Sewell from Oregon. That's who I would take.
Yeah, you know what? He's kind of I feel like dropped a little bit in stock. I think that there was talk like top 15, 20 at one point. Now he's kind of back end 1, early 2. Anything could happen on draft day. But like him or Simpson at Clemson, like I think they both make a ton of sense. I can't even, if I'm going to talk about him, I should look up his name, so I'm not going to yet. But there's an inside linebacker at Alabama. Do you have any idea? It's like Henry. Is that how it's pronounced?
Tio. I don't think it's Tutu. I think it's Tio.
I want it on record. I'm not the one trying to pronounce his name right now.
I am 100% trying to pronounce his name, but I don't think it's as simple as Tutu.
Okay. Yeah, I know, but you know who I'm talking about. So like, I just think
202.
I look.
Maybe. I don't know. Something like that.
Their inside linebackers room could be completely different next season. Miles Jack, I don't think will be back at what his cap hit would be for next season.
Wouldn't it be like 12 something million?
11.5, I believe.
11.5.
Yeah, 11.5 or 12. So I just don't see that being the case. Devin Bush is a free agent. Robert Spillane's a free agent. So who knows?
I mean, maybe they bring back Robert Spillane just because it seems like that's just kind of like a security blanket. But I just think there's no chance that Devin Bush is back.
No, absolutely not. And I don't have an issue with Spillane coming back, but my problem would be it's almost like how Penguins fans would, complain about Dom Simone, because like he's good in his role. I'm fine with Spillane being on the team, but somehow, some way by the end of the season, he's going to play 100% of the snaps. So like, as long as he comes back and is in his role and doesn't somehow like unseat the guys in front of him, which I mean, I guess, he deserves some credit for doing so too, another, straight season. But I think it's more an acknowledgement, an indictment of the players ahead of him as opposed to him. He did play some pretty decent football down the stretch. I thought he was really good against the Ravens in week 17, but again, I think that he's a very limited player physically in what he can do on a football field. I think there's a role for him. It's not the role that he's been playing down the stretch here for the Steelers. So I'm very curious just to see how the inside linebacker room is filled out by this team outside of Mark Robinson. So I want to talk about. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that linebacker, one of your first 3 picks, in my opinion, would have to be a linebacker. I mean, I don't think it's going to be that first one at 17.
Well, let me say something though too, because what if that is what they decide to? Because they're going to have some money to spend in free agency too. What if that's where they invest it? I mean, people are talking about another Edmonds brother coming in, who's a free agent in Buffalo, Tremaine. I mean, would that change your opinion then of how they? Because I think if you look at him, Robinson, Spillane, you're going to need to bring in another body. Obviously, they're going to have to bring in guys that are like mainly special teams players.
And I also look at it though as you want to. You could use the draft, like drafting somebody, as investing in the future as well, outside of a free agent too. So you're not just looking at the 2023 season; you're looking beyond that. So if you want to make an investment into a guy with that 33rd pick or that 40 some odd pick, whatever it is, you can do that in the draft and try to get a guy like they tried to with Devin Bush, but maybe this one will actually pan out.
Yeah, I think Edmonds, I think it makes a ton of sense. Obviously, well, are we even going to see Terrell back? I hope so. I think that him and Cam Sutton need to really be 2 of their big priorities to keep in house. But I think that Edmonds checked a lot of boxes for them in free agency, Tremaine, that is, being that he has so much experience, but he's still not even 25 yet. I mean, he is a young veteran player, and that is typically what the Steelers covet if they're going to be spenders in free agency. I mean, it's kind of like the defensive side, if you will, for me, for James Daniels. I mean, he checked all the boxes for them, a veteran that has played a long 4 seasons already, but was still only 24 years old when they brought him in. So I think that, sideline to sideline guy, great at. He's a 6'5" inside linebacker. I mean, to me, I think that it would be a home run pick. Now, obviously, years salary, these things are going to come into play,
right?
But we all know the salary cap's a myth as long as you're willing to spend the money up front.
Yeah, it's such a shame. I'm looking at the defensive snaps for Devin Bush. So throughout the season, for the first like 13-ish games, he was averaging, it looks like, around like the 50 snaps mark on defense, but and then it went to 25, 21, 5 over the last 4 games, and 10 snaps over the last 2 weeks. That's just showing like, and in that last game against Cleveland, he didn't even record a stat. He was just on the field 5 times. So it's a shame that trade up for Devin Bush turned out to be really bad for the Steelers in the end, but it sucks. You move on.
You look at what they gave up for him, and I know that we were all like excited at the time because it just seemed like what they needed. But the chances of an off-ball linebacker living up to what they gave up to get him were so slim to begin with. Like, he would have needed to be, a borderline, like a Pro Bowl caliber every single year, borderline Hall of Fame player in order to live up to what they gave up for him. Being the position that he plays, it's just so devalued in today's NFL. But yeah, it is what it is. I think you have to live with it. And I think we should mention, by the way, that, pre-injury, he was a pretty decent player. Who knows how things play out if he doesn't go through that injury. He did. Hindsight's 2020. It's unfortunate that he couldn't get back to like that level. But I'm not saying he was on the trajectory to live up to that, to what they gave up for him either. Just saying that it wasn't all in his control.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, while you were talking about what you were looking for in the offseason, I did, just out of curiosity, look up the snap numbers of target numbers of Diontae Johnson and George Pickens from whenever Kenny made his first start in Buffalo through the end of the season. And based off targets, Diontae is still the number 1 receiver. And maybe, I don't know, like, do you put the blame on the routes that George was running for why Kenny wasn't throwing him the ball enough, or Kenny himself? Like, there's probably multiple reasons that George wasn't getting the ball or getting the looks that Diontae was. But at the same time, Diontae over the last 13 games of the season had 110 snaps, 110 targets, and it's an average of 8.5 targets per game. And then George Pickens was 64 targets that's an average of 4.9 per game. I do think that eventually, just based off of glimpses we've seen throughout this 2022 season, that even though it may not be next season right away, but I think George Pickens will eventually surpass Diontae as Kenny's favorite target, but I think as of right now, Diontae Johnson is still the number one receiver in terms of getting the ball to him. He's still getting thrown to the most. So
Yeah.
I would still call him the number one as of right now. In my opinion, I think that changes over the next year or two. But as of right now, and as the season went, it was Diontae Johnson.
I think if we're just talking about targets, I don't know that it changes. And it's just because, well, we need to see who the next offensive coordinator, if we're going to have one. That's actually something I want to bring up too, is because right now with the way the offense is, like Diontae Johnson is kind of designed, and it's his play style too, to be like the target vacuum, if you will.
Yeah.
Like he's just always open. Of course he's going to get the ball. It's on, much shorter, high percentage routes, get the ball out of Kenny's hands. George is obviously the guy that's kind of taking the top off, the bigger play guy. He's going to have more splash plays down the field. But I think that those are kind of their two defined roles. So if we're just looking at targets themselves, I think Diontae will still be the guy leading the team in targets. But I think we could see George be the guy that has much more production overall.
Yeah. Yeah. And whenever Diontae got tackled on the 2-yard line,
I know
on that one,
yeah.
I was like, that's such a shame.
And then they don't even score touchdowns. So let's just start talking about this game specifically, which we're working in a very odd order here, folks. This is we do have notes that we go based off of, but once we start talking, it just kind of like, oh, this is a good transition to this point, and we don't end up going in the order that I have them set up in anyway. So let's talk about this Browns game. Opening drive looks great for the Steelers. They let Cleveland start with the ball, stop them, get the ball, go right down with ease, as we've talked about. But again, they just are finding ways to not score. In this scenario, Diontae Johnson gets tackled at the 2-yard line. Najee Harris scores a touchdown, but doesn't get rolled a touchdown. The Steelers do not challenge it. Pickett fails on a QB sneak, which is based off how the season has looked very odd to see. It was a one-off. And then Najee tries to jump over the pile and fumbles the ball. It obviously should not have gotten to that point, but the Steelers didn't challenge 2 plays earlier. And again, this is a new way. This is a new way of them finding ways to not score points when they're in the red zone.
It was the Jerome Bettis way.
Yeah.
Against the Colts.
There it is. Yeah, it was an ode to Jerome Bettis there. But at that point, those kind of plays always seem to be like ones where I'm sitting there thinking like, and it's so early in the game at this point. Even then, I'm like, how many times does something like that happen to a team and that ends up being the team on the winning side of a game? That just seems like one of those things that you reflect back on like, oh, we lost and you can pinpoint it to this at the start of the game. But no, the Steelers find a way. They played really well in this game on both sides of the football. I think that everybody's going to look at the defensive side and say, oh, wow, 7 sacks. They must have been, and they were getting pressure on Deshaun Watson, obviously. But a lot of them to me were ones where he was in the pocket for so long. So I think the coverage unit, the secondary, deserves a ton of credit for what they were able to accomplish in this football game too. Watson looked awful, in my opinion. I mean, that was one of the worst quarterback performances I've seen this season, and I'm very glad that it happened to him. So I don't know what your immediate takeaways were from this game, but again, it's kind of like weird to talk about because they played so well. They win this game, have one of their best games of the season. They do their part, but again, it was the last football game they're going to play.
Yeah, I mean, I probably, like everybody else, thought once Najee fumbled that ball, it's just like, oh no, here we go. And then they score first, and Njoku gets the opening touchdown of the game. And in my head, I'm like, this is just. In my head, I'm like, the Jets are going to win, the Bills are going to win, and then we're going to blow it against the Browns. It didn't actually happen. The Steelers played a really good game. Yeah, I thought Deshaun played really bad, which, I mean, honestly, could have happened to a worse guy. I'm happy about that. but he looked, and not just in this game. I think since he came back in week 11 or 12, he looked just like there was a lot of rust. And I get that just from a football's perspective. He hasn't really played a game in like a year and a half or so. So I can get that from that point. But I thought the Steelers defense played really well. They had 2 interceptions from Deshaun Watson. They were getting pressure all day, and like you said, a lot of those were coverage sacks. I thought the front 7 played a really good game, especially like the defensive line. Like Cam Hayward might have had his best game of the season. In the last game of the season, coincidentally enough, it's so funny. Like this guy keeps getting better, and he got better as the season went along too. And he's 33 years old now, and doesn't look like he's going to slow down. So I think that he played really well, and I mean overall, I thought the offense did pretty good too. Especially in the second half, they kind of got it rolling, and were able to get up by 14. And was that the Steelers' first 14-point lead they had on any team?
It has to be. I mean, the only other one.
It actually the other one might have been Cleveland in the beginning of the season, and then we blew the lead.
Yeah,
I think we were up 14-0. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was like 10-0. I don't know. But that was probably the most like complete performance the Steelers put together, and it leaves a lot of optimism moving forward. That's my biggest takeaway from the game is like it just feels like even though we're not in the playoffs, the way they finished the season as opposed to the way they ended the season. And funny enough, it's kind of similar to when you look at one of the teams we needed to lose, the Dolphins. They ended up winning, but the Steelers and the Dolphins were kind of like the opposite of each other in this season because the Dolphins started out 6-2, the Steelers started out 2-6, and then the Dolphins ended the season 2-7. Steelers ended the season 7-2. It's the same that it was just too little, too late. You look back on a couple games this season, like that Jets game and the Patriots game, and it's like those are very winnable games.
The Ravens one,
if
the first Ravens one.
Yeah, there were some very winnable games where you're talking like if this team had been able to put it together, you're looking at a like 11-12 win team. But that wasn't the case. I still think that it gives a lot of optimism just watching how not only just the team progressed, but like the offense more specifically progressed in the second half of the season. And I know a lot of Steeler fans won't want to hear it, but I will guarantee that Matt Canada is back in 2023 because of the way I will guarantee it because of the way they finished the season.
Ooh.
Unless you have insider information that you know,
I don't know. That's the weird thing is
I will guarantee, and the only reason is because they can't let him go. Like they can't just like not renew a contract. They have to fire him.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't have any information, but I was just say that's the weird part about it is not that I don't have information about it because that's common. More often than not, I don't know things that are going on inside the organization, but it's weird that nobody that covers the team is really like having feelings one way or another. Like they don't know what is going to happen either. It seems like it's all speculation and it's not based off anything that the team has said or done. So I think that we'll know within the next few days because, people have talked about it before, like typically within that first week, you're going to know about some staff changes. Obviously, you want as much time with your new staff as possible. So I think that we will know within the next few days whether Matt Canada is going to be the offensive coordinator for next season. I keep going back and forth on it. I don't think that he is necessarily a driving force in the reason that we did see the offense, start to take strides down the stretch. I think it was more about the players within the offense just finding ways in spite of him and with how well the defense was playing literally every single week in the second half. I don't think that he was, the root for the offense finding their footing. Yeah.
I'm mainly just looking at the way the Steelers have historically operated when it comes to
if he wasn't under contract for next year,
he's not being renewed.
Okay.
No, yeah. I don't think he'd be renewed. But the reason that I said the guarantee and why I think he's going to be back is because the contract doesn't expire until after 2023, and then I think if the Steelers get questioned about it, they could point to, well, the team improved as the season went on. The offense improved as the season went on. Whether that's his reasoning or not, I don't think it is. I'm just looking at how the Steelers, I think, are going to handle this whole situation. I just think it's going to be it's not broke anymore, so let's not try to fix it yet.
Yeah, along with that, being able to lean on things like when you are questioned on it, the comfort level. If Kenny is comfortable with him as the offensive coordinator.
That's actually what I wanted to ask you is like, how much pull do you think Kenny has in year one? Like, do they not necessarily pull like Ben Roethlisberger, who he can name who it's going to be, but like, how much do you think Kenny's opinion is going to sway the opinion of the upper management for the Steelers?
there's been some conflicting reports on that, hasn't there? I mean, there was somebody that, and I'm not going to name names because I don't know them, so I'm not just going to throw something out there. Somebody though had said that they were going to sit down with Kenny at the end of the season and asked about where he thought the offense was with Canada running it. And then somebody else had combated that and said that's absolutely not going to be the case. Like, Kenny is a guy that just finished his rookie season. They're like, while his input I think would be like, somewhat welcomed, and he can say, how he feels and stuff, they're not going to take that into consideration when they're making a, personnel call. So I don't know. I really don't. Like, I think that this is pure speculation at this point, what we think is going to happen. I would hope that they look at it how Tomlin said, in his end of the season press conference, where it's a total body of work, not just how the season wrapped up, even though, again, even while it was more encouraging to me, it's not enough to save the guy's job. I think that you look at not just this year, you look at last year as well, totality of his tenure here, and say, this guy, we can upgrade on this. And
I'm also looking I'm looking at crutches that the Steelers organization is going to use too when it comes to doing that, just to keep them. Like, want to look at 2021? Well, we had a 39-year-old retiring quarterback. You want to look at 2022? Well, we had a rookie quarterback. It's like I'm thinking of excuses the Steelers are going to use as to why they did bring him back, when in reality, I think the only reason they bring him back is they don't want to fire him outright. They just the contract isn't ending.
Offensive coordinators, yeah.
I just don't see it happening. So,
okay, well, let me ask you this then. As we go into the off season, I already asked about what you were most excited for in the off season. Do you foresee like any staff changes then? Like, if you think Matt Canada is going to be back, are there, spots in the offense or spots on the defense where you think there will be some turnover?
Brian Flores, I think, will probably be gone, and not because the Steelers don't want him gone. I think that I think teams are going to be interested in him, whether that
it's not going to be a lateral move. Yeah, I think
that's the thing. I think it could be. It might not be a head coach like he was in Miami, but like defensive coordinator somewhere. I think he'll get an opportunity to do that. So I think they'll be looking at not only new linebackers on the field, but a new linebackers coach as well. As far as everywhere else goes, there's no positions that really stand out to me. But that's the main one. And it's not because of how he was as a coach. It's because I just think he's going to get elevated into a better role somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I don't want to see the offensive coordinator back, I think most of the staff, like, I would be okay with being retained. Like, I think Mike Sullivan can continue to be the quarterbacks coach and working with Kenny. I think Eddie Faulkner is a really good running backs coach. I love Alfredo Roberts as the tight ends coach. Pat Meyer, to me, I mentioned him. I thought he was, deserves the MVP of the Steelers for the work that he did with the offensive line. Chrisman Jackson, the wide receivers coach, I could do with or without. I don't know what the call is going to be there. Again, I've said on here before that I've been told by somebody that I very much trust that there was a little bit of a blow up between him and a receiver on the team, and the receiver on the team saying that we're pretty much learning nothing under you, not necessarily a ringing endorsement of your coach. So I don't know that he's going to be back. That would be the one on the offense that I could see changing. On the defensive side, though, I think they have a really good defensive line coach. I really like, Terrell Austin's influence with the secondary as well. Also, he's the defensive coordinator. But yeah, Brian Flores to me would be the one on the defense that I think you could see turned over, and it wouldn't be on the Steelers' accord. It would be Brian Flores having a better opportunity elsewhere. I mean, you talk about something like the Browns, where it's like on the surface, it's like, man, do you really want to go work for the Cleveland Browns when there's really no leash? Like, they're constantly turning over. But I think for him, looking at that, like, that could be a bigger opportunity. Somebody replied to me on Twitter about this. We follow each other, but he's a Browns fan, and he said, if I'm Flores, like, you got to be looking at this as a really good opportunity to become Cleveland's defensive coordinator, because not only are you a defensive coordinator, maybe you get like that associate head coach role or something like that. If something goes south with Stefanski, who was a little bit on the hot seat this year, could he be the next head coach there? And we know that he wanted Watson in Miami prior to that situation obviously blowing up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, that could be the case. He's just the one that I think is for sure going to be gone, because, I mean, the Steelers season had been over for, it didn't even seem like 24 hours, and teams are already contacting the Steelers to request an interview with Brian Flores. So,
yeah,
it just seems inevitable at that point.
Cleveland was one of those.
Yeah.
All right. So what is if you could, I mean, maybe you have a couple. What are your biggest takeaways of the Steelers 2022 season?
TJ Watt needs to be healthy for the Steelers defense to be good. But I think it's night and day. We kind of talked about that last week. It's night and day when this guy's on the field.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the offensive line is not as bad as it has been as of right now that it has been the previous 3 seasons ish. I think in totality they have improved enough this season to where I say like I don't think they are awful anymore. Before that, they were awful, and I think the additions of Daniels and Cole really helped out the offensive line as well. Like I said, there's still a couple places you could improve on, but I think from start to finish this season, you saw the line progress as a unit, and we kind of touched on that in the beginning of the season. Though these guys have like never played together. I mean, there's a lot of new faces, and it could take time for that cohesion to get going. And I think down the stretch it did. And then we have our guy at quarterback. No matter what you thought at the beginning of the season, how he was playing when he had all those eight interceptions in the first 4 games he played or something, 5 games he played, the way he finished the season, I and especially seeing how he handled that Raiders game, the Ravens game the next week in those 2-minute drills, and then seeing what he was able to do on Sunday, I think the Steelers have their guy. I'm excited to watch him progress, but I think that we do not have to worry about quarterback for a while in Pittsburgh.
I like it. I mean, I'm in agreement there as well, obviously. I mean, for me, my biggest takeaway was just obviously Pickett is a big part of this, how much they were able to lean on, guys in their first few seasons in the same young core and to still get to this point. I think it's like the silver lining of the season. I understand, the expectation of the team and the standard should not be going 9-8 and relying on other teams to get into the playoffs. But with everything that was against them this year, with their backs against the wall, the way that they answered the bell with this many young players and still got to the point where you're playing for the playoffs in week 18, obviously very impressive. I thought it was one of Mike Tomlin's best head coaching jobs done this season to get them to this point. So, I mean, that for me on the surface, obviously. Also, I mean, I know there was people, it seemed like people were starting to underrate him a little bit because the turnovers weren't coming as much. Minkah Fitzpatrick is the best safety in football. I don't know how we can still be questioning this. When teams are willing to throw his way, it's getting turned over. Most of the time they try to avoid him, but the Steelers have gotten better. I think the addition of Diontae KZ this year allowed them, and when he got back and healthy, allowed them to move Minkah Fitzpatrick around a little bit more where teams couldn't avoid him the way that they were able to before, and he ends up finishing obviously tied first in the league in interceptions and first team on what they finally decided to start doing, which I think is a great idea, the players all-pro list for free safety. So, in my opinion, best in the game, best at what he does. And also what's interesting about this is if you remember, or if anybody watching or listening to remember, when we had Minkah on the show back in 2020, he didn't care about, being on a top 100 list. He didn't care about his Madden rating. He wanted to be recognized by his peers as one of the great players in the league. Here we go. We now have an all-pro list done by the players to tell you just what they think of Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, totally. And last thing that I could think of, and it's not even necessarily just this season, but going into the next season, and I wanted to give a shout out to Noah Strackbine, our friend, for talking about this as well on his All Steelers talk. But I don't think it matters what the cap hit is for Cam Hayward. You just pay it.
Oh, yeah, it is a pretty bad number the next 2 years, but I agree. I'm curious to see if they bring him back on that number, or if there is a way to restructure it, maybe even adding void years and like.
I mean, I'm sure there is a way to restructure it. They restructured
yeah.
Ben's how many times?
Yeah. I'm just saying though, the reason that this cap hit is ballooned this way the next 2 years is because of already doing so in the past. Like they keep kicking the can down the road. Eventually, you got to pay the piper. That's the next 2 seasons unless they continue to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I heard Noah talking about this on his All Steelers talk, and I just wanted to bring it up too. Like, I don't think that Cam Hayward is at the point where you give him the Hines Ward or the Troy Polamalu treatment. I mean, we just talked about his best game of the season came in week 18, and he's 33 years old, and he's not really showing signs of slowing down that much. He's a double-digit sack leader in his 30s at the position that he's playing too. He's playing defensive tackle. He's not a pass rusher. So I think no matter what moving forward, like, and especially for like 2023, I don't care about the 22.2 million, I think it is, cap hit. That if you can restructure it, fine, but I am totally fine with that number. I do not want the Steelers to give him the same treatment that they gave other people in the past.
No, I mean, it like you mentioned, like the production is still there. I think with some of the other guys, you were starting to see them, decline. I don't think we've seen that from Cam yet. So I think next year they're completely fine. The following year, I think, should he fall off in 2023, 2024, then you consider it going into the 2024, 2025 season. But for next year, I'm not concerned about it. And he sounds like he still wants to come back. So, like, as long as that's the case and he's not considering retirement.
I think you need that leadership too. The team is so young, like, especially for the guys playing. Overall, the team is so young. They need a lot of leadership. And I mean, he's the guy now. Like, he is not, and I want to say that he's the face of the Steelers, but at least as far as like the leadership in the room, like, you don't have Ben, you don't have Pouncey, like, he's who is left from that era of the Steelers to kind of carry over that type of leadership.
Yeah. While TJ is the best player and probably most notable, like, league wide, I think Cam is still that presence for them within the room and within the organization. So yeah, I'm in 100% agreement on that. The last thing I want to ask you, not Steelers related, who's your Super Bowl pick?
Like the matchup?
Who's the matchup and who wins? Yeah.
Okay, and the matchup, I'm gonna go with shoot. Part of me really wants to pick Tampa Bay just because I feel like if they get past the Cowboys, I think they have I think they have a really easy path.
Yeah, like, imagine they get the Cowboys, who notoriously are choke artists in the playoffs, and then, like, say they go to, like, Minnesota or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with Tampa Bay, though, is they can't run the ball. They they suck at running the ball. So I'm actually going to go with Kansas City from the AFC. And I know that might be a cop-out pick, but I mean, the AFC is, I feel like, the one that's more wide open to who could make it. I think that you're looking at, you got the Bengals and the Bills and the Chiefs all on top, and then there's even a couple like dark horses that you could see. I mean, like, who's to say that like the Jags couldn't make a surprise run or something to the AFC Championship? I mean, they were able to make it into the playoffs. Trevor Lawrence has been getting better and better, but I will pick the Chiefs out of the AFC, and I'll say that they're going to play the 49ers. It's going to be a rematch of the Super Bowl from 4 years ago, but I think the 49ers are going to win.
Oh, okay. My heart, it wants to say Buffalo. Just obviously, like, it felt like it was their time. Like, they were the big pick before the season started. They were the popular pick. Everyone's saying, like, Josh Allen MVP, Bills Super Bowl. This is their time. It's kind of all been leading up to this. And obviously with the Hamlin situation and stuff, I think a lot of people that don't have a team in the playoffs are probably going to be rooting for Buffalo. I would love for that to be the case, but I think that we've almost gotten to the point now where, like, Patrick Mahomes is underrated at this point. I mean, the season that he just put up, and, like, no one really, like, MVP talk is all about, like, Jalen Hurts, what they're doing in Philly, Joe Burrow for what he was able to do without Jamar Chase, obviously still, like, Josh Allen in the mix. I mean, based off numbers and the discrepancy in where he is compared to everybody else, I mean, Mahomes is my MVP.
Patrick Mahomes is the MVP. I don't know. I don't really think there's much of an argument otherwise. I mean, if you want to look at what Hurts and, like, what the Eagles were able to do as a team and that and all that, but, like, you just look at, like, who was the best player in football, it's still Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I agree.
I listen. I love Josh Allen, and I especially love Joe Burrow. Even though he's a Bengal, I love Joe Burrow, but I don't think either of them are anywhere close to Mahomes as a talent.
Okay. I do feel like we've gotten to the point where a lot of people are, like, underrating Patrick Mahomes, and I think that it's time for him to get a second Super Bowl. So they are my pick from the AFC.
That's the thing. I think those guys are very good quarterbacks, and I think that could they, like, win more than Patrick Mahomes? Sure. Like, the teams could win more. They could lead the team more. But I'm saying just, like, individual quarterback talent, I cannot not say that Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert or anyone else you want to stack up against Mahomes is better.
I agree. And I also think the three teams that we were just talking about right there, Chiefs, Bills, Bengals, they're the only three with a chance from the AFC.
Yeah.
So, and from the NFC is a lot tougher for me because like even Philly going 14-3, and this was even when Jalen Hurts, I almost said warts right there. Jalen Hurts was in there. They were showing their warts even when he was playing, and then obviously when he goes out, looks like a completely different team. But I don't know who really is the best team, and it's hard for me to pick San Fran with Brock Purdy, despite as good as he's looked in that system. But that's what I'm doing. I got the same Super Bowl matchup as you, but I got Kansas City winning it.
Okay.
I look at the rest of the NFC though, and it's like Philly, obviously the top dog, 14-3. San Fran, Minnesota. Do we trust them? Tampa Bay comes in at 8-9. I mean, maybe they just get hot in the playoffs, go on a run, and Brady was saving his best for last year. But and then you look at the wild cards, Dallas, the Giants, and the Seahawks. There's just, I mean, if it's not Philly or San Fran, I'm gonna be shocked.
Yeah, me too. I think the San Fran is probably the most complete team in the NFC, especially when they have a functioning offense with their quarterback. But honestly, whether it's Brock Purdy or Jimmy Garoppolo, I would still pick the 49ers to go to the Super Bowl. And I think the addition of Christian McCaffrey has been good too. And and the reason I'm picking San Francisco in the Super Bowl is because I think when I compare the defenses, I like what San Francisco has on the defensive side of the ball more than Kansas City.
So we're talking about Purdy here. You just mentioned Jimmy G, though, and I didn't think about this. 4 days ago, it was put out if the 49ers go on a run, Jimmy G could return late in the playoffs. Are they going to be willing to make that switch?
I wouldn't. If you define late in the playoffs, like in the NFC Championship or something like that, like
when I hear late in the playoffs, that's what I'm thinking is NFC Championship.
Like. If Purdy takes you there, I'm not taking him out. You got to ride the hot hand.
Yeah, that's gonna be so crazy. If what you're saying happens, right? I mean, you said
if Purdy wins the Super Bowl, what do you do with Trey Lance? Because I don't think this is like a Nick Foles situation where Carson Wentz is still your starter. We haven't seen Trey Lance that much as a starter for the 49ers, but we saw Brock Purdy take them to a Super Bowl and win a championship. What do they do in that situation? Do they trade him and try to get a huge haul, or do they still try to keep him around? Because it's really hard.
Which one are you talking about?
Do they trade Trey Lance? Okay. Because to me, it's really hard to say, thank you for our Super Bowl, but you're not the starting quarterback anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough because you have so much invested in Lance being the guy when you trade what they did to get him.
Oh, I know.
I mean, I don't think that we've seen anything because like you mentioned, I think with Wentz had a little bit more of a body of work to turn back to, and obviously that didn't pan out for them either. But it's not like Nick Foles ended up being some great quarterback somewhere else.
Trey Lance has what, 2 starts?
Yeah, and he only had 11 starts in college. I mean, so it's
a tough decision.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be interested to see, but it might not even obviously play out this way. It might
not play out that way. But in my scenario where the Chiefs lose to the 49ers in the Super Bowl, that is going to be a really tough decision. Because, I mean, then what do they do with Jimmy Garoppolo, too? Do they trade both of them? They trade Lance and Garoppolo? Like, Brock Purdy has really thrown a wrench into what the 49ers' future plans could be.
Well, Jimmy G came back on that rework deal, but isn't he's a free agent now, though, right?
Oh, is he?
I believe so. I mean, the talk is him going to the Jets.
I guess all the trade talks have been were this past off season. So
yeah, I think that rework deal was for this year, and he's a free agent again. So,
who is your upset or surprise game of Week 1 in the playoffs?
Would it be? Is this really an upset? I mean, it's the lower seed beating the higher seeds. I don't know if this is like an upset. I'm taking, or no, it's the higher seed beating the home team would be beating but I know they're not favored. So does that count? As long as the team that's not favored wins, does that count? Or even though, all right, Jags over the Chargers.
Okay.
That's the only one that I think happens though. Like I'm not giving the Dolphins any shot against Buffalo. The Ravens without Lamar are not. They weren't beating the Bengals, I don't think, with Lamar, but that's not happening. And then I look at the NFC. I'm picking
Mine's
the 49ers.
actually in the NFC.
I'm not picking the 49ers to beat the Seahawks. Vikings and Giants.
You mean the Seahawks to beat the 49ers?
I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. Seahawks not being the 49ers.
I was like, you're not picking the 49ers, but you have them going to the Super Bowl.
49ers go to the Super Bowl. I'm not picking the Seahawks to upset them in the first round.
That's like that Stephen A clip was like, what AFC West team is going to score the most points in week one?
Chargers.
And he's like, I'm gonna go with the Chargers. All right. Who wins? Chargers, Raiders. He's like, I don't know. I'm gonna go with the Raiders.
I don't see. I love Brian Daboll, and I love the Giants. I don't see it, even though I don't trust the Vikings to go on a run. And the Cowboys are favored over the Buccaneers. That's kind of a toss-up for me, though.
So I'm picking the Giants to beat the Vikings.
Okay.
That's my upset of week one.
I'm glad you did it.
Yeah. I think it's a very realistic matchup, especially watching some of those Viking games in the back half of their schedule where they just looked like they get blown out and looked like they didn't have much going for them, especially offensively at times. I'm picking the Giants to beat them. Danny Dimes,
I wouldn't mind
baby.
it. I don't mind either of those teams, and I really like what the Giants have done there, turning around so quickly. To me, that's my coach of the year, by the way, is Brian Daboll with the Giants, because that's just. I think Doug Peterson deserves some consideration. I just mentioned, even though they didn't make the playoffs, Tomlin deserves a ton of consideration, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But still, I'm with Brian Daboll. So I would love to see that, even though I don't necessarily mind the Vikings.
Right.
All right. While the Steelers season comes to an end, now everybody that is just a casual Penguins fan will be tuning in full now. They got their full attention at this point. So the Penguins, just at the right time, have won a couple hockey games too. Have not been 60-minute complete efforts, but nonetheless, they get a win over the Coyotes in a comeback win against the Canucks, where they're down 3-0. They come back in this game. I mean, when Gino scores the first one and Sid gets the second one to pull them within 3-2, if you get goals from both of them in the same game, it's a lock. The Penguins are not losing that hockey game. I want to ask you, though, the guy that tied this game up, and I thought was one of the best players on the ice last night and has been for most of the season, Jason Zucker, a very polarizing Pittsburgh Penguin. With as many injuries that he's had, he hasn't necessarily lived up to the cap hit or what they traded to get him. But it really seems like he is the pulse. He's the X factor of this hockey team. Whenever he has a night like he did last night, the rest of the team feeds off of it, and they put together a not 60-minute effort, obviously, but as close to as we've seen this season.
Yeah, no, he's been really good. And I think you're right. Once he plays better, it just seems like the team plays better, especially the Gino line. I mean, Gino doesn't really create individually like he once did. He's still a really good hockey player, so don't even get into that and all those offseason talks. But I do think whenever Gino has a playmaker like Zucker on his line, that line is really cooking. And I think you saw that last night. One of the Gino goals was set up by Zucker as well. And I think his playmaking is underrated, and that's not something that we've been able to totally see like he did in Minnesota compared to what he's done in Pittsburgh so far. But you have seen flashes of it, and I think that this year he's played better overall. I mean, he had the 1 goal and 2 assists last night, and then I think on the season he's got 26 points now in 36 games. So it hasn't been what the cap number has shown, but I've really liked what I've seen from Jason Zucker, and when he's playing well, you're right. It does seem like the Penguins do play better and maybe that's just because they need more than like one line clicking. And so if he's clicking, they have multiple lines clicking. So I agree with you. I think he does have a pulse, especially maybe with the team in general, but especially that second line. If he's buzzing and he's really going on a night, I think the second line really performs well.
And I think last night was one of the first nights where we've seen that line produce with Raquel on it instead of Russ, because that's what we've been talking about. Like,
that's true,
we were worried about Sullivan making that switch for that reason, because although, we went through a stretch where they weren't producing, Raquel had been better on that top line and Russ had been better on that second line. When you switch them back, it's like, okay, maybe the top line still finds something with Rust up there, but Raquel and Gino just were not working together. I think last night was kind of the first time that we saw that kind of flip where Kel was working on that line and that line was producing. Granted, they had some success in the power play too. Gino scored one of his goals there. But one, I want to go back to Jason Zucker. Obviously, I don't think it would be at the number that he's currently on, and I would hope not. Would you like to see Jason Zucker extended?
All right. How old is this guy?
I think he's 30. 30 or 31.
30. He's about to turn 31 in 5 days.
Okay.
So happy early birthday, Jason. Man, it's tough because the team is, how do I put this? Old already. It would really have to be on like a shorter term deal, not like the deals that they were giving out this past offseason. Like I'm talking like it would have to be like a 3-year max, but I'd more ideally look at like a 2-year deal.
Can we give him Kasperi Kapanen's contract, the one he just signed? But
I would love that. 2 years, $3.5 million. That would be a great number.
Yeah.
I would be open to bringing Zucker back, especially if he continues to play like he has throughout the season. Also, 56.6 Corsi percentage on the season as well, so that's a really good number too. But it would have to be definitely a lower cap hit than the 5.5. And like I said, my max would probably be 3 years, but I'd ideally be looking at it just a 2-year contract. Just because it's not saying like this team is going to fall off the rails because they have a lot of like older players. They're kind of like 30 is kind of like the middle age for hockey players. Like you're a middle ager. So I would say like I don't mind that he's 30, but like I don't want to keep filling up and refilling the team with guys that are older. And maybe that's a bad take, but the Penguins are the second oldest team in hockey, I think.
Yeah.
So it would just have to depend. I mean, the way he's playing now, I would be fine giving him like a 2-year contract at like $3.5 million. Yeah, like the basically the captain contract. Just give him that contract.
Yeah, I would probably be even okay with it being more in salary as long as it does stay lower term. Like I'm thinking like the opposite, like you're saying, of the contracts that they just handed out this year in the offseason, where you're sacrificing a little bit of cap in order to have the shorter term.
I mean, like give him like a 2-year $4 million per.
Yeah, I think that could work out. And
I'd
also I think the biggest thing for me and why I would like to have him back is I know that he doesn't play in the bottom 6 right now, but like say that he at some point does here in the next couple seasons, like with what you're getting from the bottom 6 right now, which is absolutely nothing. I think that he is somebody that could like rejuvenate that or give you something like some type of pulse within the bottom 6, because you need to have these secondary players. You need to have these complementary players that are providing for nights where, Sid's line isn't going to score multiple goals or Gino's line is not going to score multiple goals. You got to have secondary players that are contributing. And he's been one of those guys where, like you said, 26 points in 36 games. What's that put him on pace wise? I mean, it's got to be 60 points.
26 divided by 36 times 82 is 59.2 points. So almost 60 points.
60. Pretty good. But you take that. I think you take that every day of the week.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if Jason Zucker scores, if he's a guy that can give you 50 points in a season, you take that all day. So anything more than 50, I think that would be a great season from Jason Zucker.
Yep. All right. And then I also wanted to ask about, obviously, we saw Casey DeSmith not play that well. I don't know that it was like all his fault last night, those 3 goals, but it was 0.7 expected goals, and he gave up 3 goals at that time.
No, I mean, the one that, going through some of the goals, like the first one, the Connor Garland one, I mean, 6 shot, by the way. That was disgusting. But also, you kind of like to get a save there. There's no screen. It's just basically one-on-one. You take on the shot, and it's a good goal. It's a goal. I'm trying to think of the other ones.
The second one was a little bit of some cluster in front of the net, if you will. Besser scores a backhander, but I thought the Smith should have been able to cover it before it even got to that point. Not a good rebound to allow right in front of his crease. He tries to jump on it. Then he's like hunched over, and Besser's able to backhand it over him. And then, the third one was like deflected up high, or it went off Sid and or Pedersen, but it was like up higher and he should have been able to react, and it kind of just goes right by his pad. I didn't think any of the 3 were necessarily really good goals. I thought all 3 could have been prevented. But
But I mean, also, even if it wasn't all his fault too, just in a game and kind of the flow of the game, when you give up 3 goals in succession like that, how far apart they were, you kind of need something to spark the team too. So making the switch to Tokarski, like that wasn't really that surprising.
So Tokarski comes in, and I wanted to ask you. Well, obviously he played really well in this game to be able to get the win. Would you give him another look though? Like, would he be your starting goaltender going into Thursday's game against Winnipeg?
Sure, absolutely. Why? To me, the question is why not? Because we know what Casey DeSmith is. We haven't really seen Tokarski except for this one appearance at the NHL level. So it's like, why not give him another shot? He performed well in that. He only gave up the 1 goal on, I think it was like 19 shots. So it's just like, why not? As with Jari being out, you kind of need to put the right guys in net anyway. So if it's going to be Tokarski, then I think that you give him a shot. And I think that recency bias would say, okay, start him on Thursday.
Yeah. No, I'm in agreement. And, we saw Tristan Jarry go on IR. Now he can come off at any point. It was retroactive to when the injury occurred on January 2nd. So, but I do think that we're going to be without him for some time. And I think with DeSmith, we are learning more and more that less is more with him. Like, he is a backup. Obviously, you can give him some starts in a pinch, but he's not a guy that you're going to want to throw out there like 2-3 games in a row. I think they're going to need to rely on both of these guys until Tristan Jarry is back. So yeah, I'm giving him a look. I'm letting him start this game on Thursday and seeing what he can do with it. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. If he takes the ball and runs with it, great. But otherwise, I'm probably going back and forth and letting both guys play until we get Jarry back.
Yeah, and I mean, in Buffalo last year, he started 28 games, and the year before that started in 10 games. He started in 16 games before in Montreal in the 20. Holy cow! I didn't realize this guy was this old. 2014-15 season. That was surprising.
Played in the Eastern Conference Final for them when Carey Price got hurt.
Yeah. So like he has in-game experience at the NHL level. So it's not like you're starting a guy fresh from the AHL that's never been in the NHL. So I would have no problem with him getting the nod at least on Thursday and then potentially moving forward until Jarry's back. I just think you play whoever's going to be the best goalie. It doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah. Last thing I want to talk about before we go is we did see the power play strike for the first time in a very long time, and it comes off an Evgeni Malkin slap shot, one-timer. To me, and I don't know what you think about this, that's kind of, I think, what their power play needs to be about at this point. Like, we've been searching for answers. What can this identity be for this power play? I would run it through Gino's one-timer right now and it being about creating traffic in front of the net, because nothing else has really worked, and we finally saw that work, and we've seen it work a few times this season. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of what the identity of the power play needs to be at this point.
I could see that being the case. I mean, he definitely scores goals from there. It was a rocket of a shot last night. I think that this power play, and we've said this over the past several years, but like ever since Phil Kessel's been gone, they just have like you're saying, no identity. They don't really know what to do with the puck. They kind of just will pass it around, lose it, and then it just gets iced down. They don't really have that much creativity with the power play and what they're doing. So if you have like a one-trick pony that will actually work, like a Gino one-timer, then maybe you do drive it through there, because otherwise they just look like they're passing the puck. They don't really get the shot off. And believe me, I hate when people yell shoot at a game, but sometimes I'm sitting at home, I'm like, okay, guys, you got to shoot the puck in order to like, and that's the thing. I feel like the Penguins, and I don't know if this is coming from the coaching staff or the players on the ice or what, it's like they're looking for just like the pretty goals and don't realize like if you just shoot at the net, sometimes you'll get a dirty goal. And an ugly one, and that's kind of like in Sid's wheelhouse too, because in the power play he's always in front of the net. So I feel like you never know like what would happen if you do shoot more. And I hate saying that because I hate listening to people yell at them to shoot, but if they're not going to look for any type of goal and just looking for a pretty goal, it might as well be the one-timer from Gino. So I kind of agree.
I think it's a matter of simplifying, because they know how talented they are, and sometimes that can be to their own demise because they try to do too much. They try to be too creative. They are too talented, and they try to set up the perfect play. And it's just like, you guys are giving way too much credit to these guys a man down right now and to this goaltender right now. Just like you said, throw it at the net, trust yourselves, trust your instincts, and that's, simplify things. I think they get ahead of themselves too much. And you see the results being what they are in that power play drought that they were just on before Gino did score that one on Tuesday night. So,
but now they've won 2 games in a row, and so they're going to win like 10 more in a row because that's kind of how the season's gone.
Yeah. So for everybody that their Steelers season just ended and you're just now getting into hockey, this is a perfect time for you, at least for a little bit. I kept saying Thursday in terms of Winnipeg. That's not till Friday. I forgot they have an extra day off here. So from now to our next episode, they got the Jets on Friday, the Hurricanes on Saturday, back to back. Oh, that's the team you want to see off a back to back. That's great. The Ducks on Monday, and then you'll probably hear from us before Senators. So we'll see. Good litmus test. That game, that second game of a back to back against the Hurricanes is going to be very tough and very telling of where this team is at, I think. Also, still without this is where I want to end the show, because we've talked about the Penguins in very good and bad ways in terms of what they've done on the ice this season.
Yeah.
Them going to Montreal at 4 a.m. after playing the Arizona Coyotes to be there for Chris Letang's dad's funeral is the best indictment of the Pittsburgh Penguins as a team and as an organization. That was Mike Sullivan's call, but obviously needs to be approved by people much higher than him. He's not the one paying for the flight there, the flight back, and can approve that himself. So there is no better indictment of how close this team is, how class of an organization this is, than as a team, an entire team, going to Montreal to be with Chris Letang for his dad's funeral.
Yeah, that was awesome. Like you're saying, it just speaks to the type of organization the Penguins has been, and if you feel like we've always kind of known this, but this is just another evidence of that. We've had so many guys talk about how this is like a top class organization, and this is just another example of why that's the case.
And from a player's perspective, I mean, it's such a cliche, but it is like these guys spend more time with their teammates than they do their own families, during the season. So Chris Letang is a brother to them, and obviously for Gino and Sid even more so than the other guys. But anybody that's been with them for some time, and even just this season, they've obviously developed a very good relationship. So it was awesome to see the team as a whole go and do that, and hopefully, sooner than later he's able to rejoin them. But for the time being, take your time, Chris, and we wish the best for you and your family. They also should be getting Jeff Petrie back here at some point too. I don't know which one of those two will be back, but it will be a welcome sight when one and both are back in the lineup. But other than that, I think that's about it.
Yeah. Crazy that the football season's already gone. Excited to watch more hockey, but time flies when you're having fun. At least the second half of the season was fun.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of football conversations we start to have on here. But sooner, before we know, we're going to be talking draft. So the time always flies. I mean, you mentioned time flies from the time the season starts in September to the end of the season. But I think this off season will fly by too, especially once we get to, March, the combine, the draft. Then we're in like rookie camp, mini camp. I mean, it goes by quick. So
yeah. And for those of you who watch on YouTube, I will be in a new background next week. Not going to say where yet, but I will have a new background behind me. I mean, this is still in Utah. This is my friend's house, Quentin. But yeah, there will be a different background that will be more permanent for a while. So some news next week.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, for anybody watching on YouTube or listening, we can't thank you enough for getting through this entire episode with us. You will see some links in the description wherever you are watching or listening to this. That is to the Isla Keen Fund, as well as the Chasing M shirt, and also the foundation itself, the fundraiser. And again, I am so excited to see what they end up doing with those funds, because it's gonna be on such a much larger scale of what it was intended to be, and that's absolutely awesome. So but for everybody watching or listening, can't thank you guys enough. For Tyler, for Smitty, this has been Around the 412, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.